Hi, I'm Randy Altman with Post Perspective. We're here with Charles Haine, and we're going to be talking about filmmaking. Charles, before we jump into your latest project, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? You wear a couple of different hats, literally. Just tell us what you do.
I'm a filmmaker, work a lot as a director DP and sort of a freelance basis. I a long time worked as a colorist before that. And then I'm also a professor. I teach filmmaking at the Feirstein Graduate School of Cinema, which is part of Brooklyn College, which is part of the City University of New York. And we are in a facility at Steiner Studios in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We've got 4 sound stages and post facilities and a theater, 4K calibrated projection, the whole thing. It's really like the nicest film school on earth. And I can say that because I didn't build it, somebody else did. And so I try and balance sort of, half of my career is like education and then half of my career is filmmaking.
Encompassed in that filmmaking title, you do a lot of different things. So do you shoot, you edit a little, you edit a bit, you color. Can you tell us a bit
So
about?
I'm not actually, I'm not an editor. I've never really edited any of my own work. On smaller projects, I color grade my own work because a lot of times the tight turnaround on smaller projects, if I'm working on like branded content or advertorial or something like that, or if I'm working on, sort of like a mini doc for a food client or something like that, a lot of times there's not turnaround to go out to a color facility. And then when I direct bigger projects, I usually take color out of house. On my feature, I worked with a great colorist, Paul Byrne, and there's a few other bigger colorists that I work with when the project sort of warrants it. Most of my work, I work as either just director or director DP, do music video work a little bit, mostly more sort of commercial and branded stuff in the last few years and sort of like small doc work. And yeah, the project we're talking about today, I recently did a project, sort of a launch video. Elena Cohn is a fashion brand I've worked with for 3 or 4 years now, and they were launching the first ever retail space. So they started as an online platform. A lot of fashion brands today started on Instagram. They started on Instagram, and then they grew to have a retail facility. And then a few weeks before launching their retail facility down on the Lower East Side, they wanted to do sort of a nice video rollout on their Instagram, sort of promoting their summer lineup and also their new facility. So we did a shoot for them. And just because of the way scheduling works out, I mean, this happens all the time. I think most people would understand this. We had a very tight turnaround in post. I think the grand opening party was about 2 weeks away when we were finally able to schedule the shoot and bring all the elements together. And so we were in this sort of interesting situation where we had a very tight turnaround to turn around a large variety of different assets. We were shooting a lot of different outfits. We were going to need to repurpose that content into a variety of different edits. And then, they wanted within a week of us shooting to be rolling those out on their Instagram to start promoting their grand opening party, because you don't want to just announce it the morning of, unless you're incredibly popular. You want to start rolling it out over time. And so we were very excited at the new cloud tools that had rolled out literally weeks before in Resolve. I think this job all happened, the cloud tools might have still been in beta. I don't know if they'd left beta yet, because my editor and I've been coloring in Resolve since 2011, 2012, like 10 years now, easily. I'm Resolve certified as a colorist. I teach color in Resolve. And over the last 2 or 3 years, the editors I hire, I've started to try and move them editorially over to Resolve, because I'm very focused on client experience through post-production. I used to own a post house in Los Angeles for a long time. And one of the things I noticed is that clients, I love Elena, but, I want to make sure everything that I'm showing Elena Cohn looks as close as possible to the final result. And I've never had a problem with Elena or really any fashion brands, but I remember that earlier in my career, there'd be these situations where we'd send something to client and it wouldn't be properly color corrected, and the client would get very distracted and they wouldn't even be looking at the edit because they'd have all these color notes. They'd be like, oh, but this, and it would be stuff you knew you were going to do. You're like, yeah, I know we're going to do that. Just relax. Like, let's focus on the edit. And what's been really beautiful to me about my editors moving over to Resolve is at this point, everything I send to a client is colored. Everything gets touched before I'm showing it to anyone outside me and my creative collaborators, so that I never end up in a situation where there's a surprise, where we go a different direction in the color grade and the client says, wait, that's not what I was thinking. Or where the worst thing happens, you get, a whole email of notes from the client and it's all color stuff you were going to do anyway and no edit stuff. And you're like, well, no, like I really try and think about like, how can I guide this collaboration with the client so that they understand sort of naturally what they should be doing each stage of the way. And I feel like if I do a color pass from the beginning, then I'm getting color notes that are actually relevant, and I'm getting a bigger focus on the edit notes because they feel like they're seeing what they want to see. So we did this in Cloud 18 because the editor doesn't live anywhere near me. And once I handed the footage over with Dropbox, we were able to do everything with just, we would log into the cloud and we would text each other to be like, are you logged in right now? Nope, I'm not logged in. You can log in. And I would log into the project and I would do my color, and then I would log out and he'd be like, oh, I forgot. I need to reframe this one thing. And just using texting, Dropbox, and Blackmagic Cloud, it was sort of the easiest post workflow I'd ever had on a job, which was great because our turnaround was so tight, because we had such that tight little window there to turn out so many assets, to make sure the assets were going to Elena and getting approved by the brand, and then making sure that we were able to then make all of their changes really quickly. It was sort of an overall seamless process. I think the thing I most liked about it was that it separated out media from project. Like the Blackmagic Cloud toolset is a tool set that is just about making sure the project shares really well. And then if you want, you can have your media on Dropbox, which is what I've been using for a decade, or Google Drive, and you can manage your media however you want. I've worked with some other tools that are like, all right, you're going to use the projects and the media, and it's all going to be bundled in our thing. And I haven't always found that the media moved how I wanted to move. But with Dropbox, it was really easy for me to be like, here's my raws, here's my dailies, take the dailies. The client only takes, the editor only takes the dailies. And I found it to be sort of like, oh, this is how this should always work. It was a really pleasant, sort of seamless moment.
Do you think that you could have pulled off the quick turnaround without working in the cloud? Maybe just give an example of how it would be different.
So notoriously in post-production, you work incredibly long hours. I mean, that's part of post-production, but I'm now middle-aged. I'm in my 40s. I have a kid. I like spending time with my kid. And one of the things we don't really talk about with those miserable hours in post is one of the reasons why the hours in post were always so miserable is you were waiting for files to move around. You were waiting for a project to get unlocked. You were, in your dream scenario in post, you were hard at work all 40 hours. But in reality, a lot of post houses had ping pong tables because you were waiting on a render, or you're waiting on a hard drive or whatever. I mean, I remember being in my 20s and we played video games until like 4 a.m, waiting on this render to finish, the client and I. And it was fun to play Xbox or whatever, but it wasn't the most productive use of my time. And we could have done the turnarounds because you can always figure it out in post. But because of the cloud tools, everything, I was able to see my kid that week. Like there was never a situation where I was like, okay, I'm going to be stuck in this post house with this editor until 11 and I'm not going to be home till after bedtime. I could go home. I could do bedtime after my kid went to sleep. I could then check in on where the edit was. I could take a look at it. And the editor didn't even have to make exports for me. Literally, I could just text and say, I'm ready. Can I take a look? And they'd say, oh, okay, I closed the project. And then I'd open the project and the edit would be there. And what was beautiful is for little stuff, instead of me having to text back and be like, oh, I have this note, or go into Frame.io and put in notes for little stuff that I knew how to do. I'm not an editor, but I know a little bit. I just stuff. I was like, oh, let's reframe it like this, or like, ooh, let's move this shot here. And I just did it. And then I closed the project and I texted and I was like, I took a look. Here are my other notes. And I used markers for notes in the timeline. And it just worked so painlessly in a way that before the cloud would have made it, I would have been able to do the work, but I wouldn't have been able to actually have dinner and do bedtime. And I really liked having dinner with my kid and doing bedtime. And so that sort of became the balancing act for me, where it was much easier for it to integrate well on that time frame without feeling like it interrupted my life so dramatically. And that is what the cloud really gave to us on this job. I remember so many times earlier in my career, we would, booking a thing with a 1-week turnaround is not uncommon, especially in music videos. You book something that shoots on a Saturday and has to deliver that next Thursday. But that just, when you booked it, you immediately were like, okay, well, that next week, we're just all moving to the post house and we'll bring in the sleeping bags and we'll just do it. And with the cloud, we didn't have to do that. And we were still able to turn around good work that I'm proud of really quickly, that the client really liked and was used to do the promotion, and their kickoff party was a great success. And we were glad to be part of that. So I feel like the cloud tools as rolled out by Blackmagic have finally hit that part where it's like, oh, this isn't breaking the budget. I'm not paying for some exclusive B2B only high-end infrastructure. I'm paying for Dropbox, which every filmmaker is already paying for. And I'm building on that Dropbox tool that I already know how to use this really great project sharing system that allows it to just happen really naturally. And so we were very excited about that.
So is this a workflow you're going to use going forward on different projects, including projects that you're shooting with maybe a Blackmagic camera?
So at this point, this is my default workflow. It's my default workflow, basically whatever camera I shoot on. I would say about 80% of what I shoot right now is on the Blackmagic 12K. I really love that camera. The symmetrical sensor and the clear pixels give really great low light, and I really like the skin tone reproduction. So most of what I shoot is Blackmagic, and obviously Blackmagic integrates really well with Resolve. So those work very well together. But what's also nice is this works just as well with sort of the other tranche of my business. The rest of my business is either Alexa when, you know, the budget allows, or I shoot a lot on the DJI 4D, which is a stabilized camera that I really enjoy. This particular Atlanta job was all on the DJI 4D because it was roller skating around the Lower East Side. And so we rigged up the 4D on a bike, and I was pedaling the bike, and my camera operator was down in the bucket of the bike. So I was basically the key grip. I would put the bike places, and we would get these shots. And that's the kind of shot it would be very hard to do on a Blackmagic. You could put a Blackmagic in a Ronin. It's doable. The 4D makes it a little easier because it has built-in stabilization. But what's nice is I didn't feel any, from the post perspective, the camera didn't really feel like an impact. It didn't feel like, oh, I'm working with a non-Blackmagic camera, and that makes it harder. It was basically an identical workflow of taking my big RAWs, either my 6K ProRes from the 4D. The 4D should roll out Blackmagic RAW soon. They might have already. Or if I'm shooting the 12K, my 12K RAWs, I'm taking them, I'm immediately making some sort of low-res transcode file for my editor that's going in Dropbox. My editor's getting it almost immediately. They're texting or emailing me to confirm they have it. And then from there, the rest of it is just like Dropbox and cloud, whatever camera we shot on. And this, at this point, is my default. Of the sort of freelance editors I hire on various projects, I'm down to maybe one who doesn't cut Blackmagic. Pretty much everybody else has moved over. I know that they've mostly moved over for me because I asked for it, and I'm sure they still cut Premiere and Avid and Final Cut with their other clients. But, you know, I've become that client who has all right, well, I'm hiring you and I would like you to work in this software. And the reason why is I want that ability to go in and do my color grade before it goes to client. I want the ability to go in and do a little bit of fusion if I need to clean up or do a sky replacement. I want the ability to go in and use Fairlight if I need to do it, without feeling like I'm backing myself into a corner that's going to make a lot of extra work later. I remember back in the day, we did have one particular client. This was 10 years ago, but they were very touchy, and we always color graded everything. But we were cutting in Final Cut 7. This tells you how long ago it was. And so we'd move it over to Resolve. I would do a color grade. We would send it to client. But then when we kept editing, we'd go back to that uncolor graded project in Final Cut 7, and we'd keep editing. And then to send the next to the client, we'd send it back to Resolve, reattach the grades, send it to client. And it was all this extra work just to make sure that we were sending something color graded to the client. Whereas now, with it all integrated in one app, it's just once I've color graded that first pass, I don't really need to touch the color again until I do the final grade, because those grades live with the shots for every subsequent delivery. So it's been a really sweet workflow.
Well, Charles, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. We're going to show some clips, and where can people go to find out a bit more about your work?
Okay, so I have a website, charleshaine.com, which has some work samples, and I have moved, like many people, over to Mastodon. So instead of finding me on the other platforms, you can find me on Mastodon at Charles Haine at barbecue.snoot.com. That's where I am on Mastodon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.